All right, so we're going to start off with just a couple quick things. If you need to take a break, take one. Manage your time and yourself as needed. You're all adults, but just come back and be engaged with us. It's definitely hard as a presenter to not see anyone else, but your engagement in the chat in the last feature was awesome, and just looking forward to continuing that. And then there are quite a bit of resources that Joe and I have both uploaded in the Files tab of your screen and your homepage. So be sure to utilize those and take a look, take notes, be engaged, ask questions. We will and can stop if there's a good point made and we need to elaborate, so don't hesitate on that. And we'll definitely hope to have some time at the end to tie up any loose ends. If I missed anything, please add to the chat feature and let us know, because this is your session just as much as it is ours. But excited that you're here and just sort of wanted to put a few things out there for us. All right, well, seeing none, if they do get added, we will note them and we'll move on.
All right, so a little activity in the chat for you all. I'd like to get a sense of kind of who is in the room. I know we have a lot of chapter presidents here, so if you could in the chat, based on the parameters on your screen, if you could tell me if you're from a big school, a medium school, a small school, if your chapter is a large chapter, a medium chapter, a small chapter, and if you come from a public state institution or a private institution. I'll give a few minutes for that to come in. All right, I'm seeing a lot of diversity in here, so that's good. Getting a lot of different perspectives.
Definitely helpful to scroll through these as you're looking to find some friends, brothers who are from similar sized institutions. You know, the great part of Academy, virtual or in person, is making those connections. And so, you know, grabbing their names, hitting them up, messaging them, you know, our greatest resource is each other. And so don't hesitate to ping your brothers and make some connections that way, which is one of the reasons why we ask this.
Yeah, and if you guys explore around on the platform that you're watching us on, and even clicking on people's names in the chat, you're able to basically direct message people. So if you see someone make a great point in chat or something like that, feel free to reach out to those guys, you know, exchange contact information, exchange ideas. Academy is just a couple of days out of the year, but you guys have a full year ahead of you of being chapter presidents. So, you know, as things come up throughout this next year, turn to your other chapter presidents. They're probably going through something pretty similar. And you're able to see, you know, what their chapter size is, what their school size is here. So you can kind of compare and contrast there.
Yes, Justice, good point. If you do click on someone's name, you will get pulled out and you'll have to come back. So just know where to find us, and you can always make that adjustment as needed. All right, so we'll let you continue adding school size, chapter size, type of institution, keep that going as you're hopping in. But let's get rolling on some of the content. So we really want you all throughout our time together is just to get your mind set sort of in the right direction, right? So Joe already mentioned you're the CEO of your chapter. You are really the chief executive officer of everything. I don't know if CEOE is a real thing, but we are making it as making it real for us. And as a little joke, this is our observations as told by 2 recovering chapter presidents. While I am not a Fiji, I am a Pi Beta Phi and was a chapter president for my chapter during my undergrad time. And so these were some of our things that we really just would be remiss, honestly, if we didn't just name them. So as soon as you really start to understand some of these key aspects of chapter president, you will have an easier time. This does not mean you only have 3 things to do. That is obviously not the case, but these items really guide your work. So managing, reducing that risk and harm. Once you get a firm handle on that, it'll really likely help push you into the direction that you're hoping to make your chapter. You've made an oath, whether actually or by just saying yes, that you will make the chapter better. You can no longer just be that person who lets things happen. You are going to be the person who steps up to the plate to make your Phi Gamma Delta chapter the best that it can be and where you want it to go in the future. And then you transform, develop, and push your cabinet and brothers. You are the leader. You are there as their challenger, as their supporter. But if you aren't pushing the expectations and the growth of your organization and your brothers, you're missing the mark on what a good chapter president does. So we aren't going to pretend like we're in a college course or a class on theory. But if you're not familiar with transactional leadership and the theory around that, we are going to talk a little bit about it and mostly just show a video. And we want you to think about it in terms of what you've seen be done in the past and how you want to change it for the future. So the 4 key aspects of transformational leadership are the following. So idealized influence, individualized consideration, intellectual stimulation, and inspirational motivation. So next we'll show you a quick under 4-minute video that will really kind of dig into it. But again, these are just things to consider as you are kind of teeing up your game plan as chapter president. How do we get those 10 guys to show up that typically don't? How do we forget about some of the people who continually become problems for us and really invest in the brothers that want to be there and care about the same things that we do? And how do we stop running into a brick wall when it comes to COVID expectations or your own sort of policies and goals as a chapter president? So it's not to tell you how to do your job, it's to help you think about ways to do it differently and better. So we will play this quick video and go from there.
Transformational leadership is a very effective style of leadership, and decades of leadership research has shown that it leads to a wide variety of positive outcomes. Followers of transformational leaders are motivated, engaged, satisfied, have positive attitudes, experience less stress and burnout, and perform at higher than expected levels. In order to be a transformational leader, one is required
Okay, so it looks like there's some audio issues. We will post the video in the chat. Joe, if you can do that and I'll run through it. So we'll let you watch that on your own time. Again, it's 3 minutes and 50 seconds, so not too much of a commitment. But with a few quick chats, let me see if anyone has watched Ted Lasso on Apple TV since it came out. Any Ted Lasso? Yep. Okay, cool. So we have a couple people. You all, if you think about how Ted Lasso led, he truly, honestly, kind of showed us transformational leadership. He was a leader who was goofy in a sense, but it worked for him. And he got his football team to do something that they had never done before and interact with each other in a way that they hadn't ever really been as a team. So it's a good example of transformational leadership and a TV show. We'll get this video into the chat and you can watch it. Apologies on that aspect piece of the audio, but take a moment when you have time to watch, and then you'll hopefully some of these things will make a little bit more sense on what we were really pulling at when it came to transformational leadership.
All right, so the next chat activity we're going to go through is what's on the screen. And what I'm looking to see from all of you is the answers to these three questions. So the first one is, who are going to be your go-to people? So who's going to be your mentors? Who are going to be your allies? Who's going to be your support system? And why am I asking that? Because, and I know I saw my chapter brother Xavier at Akron. When I was chapter president at Akron, the Purple Legionnaire, the fraternity and sorority advisor, they were my mentors, the people who kept me accountable, kept me in check. IHQ was always my resource, you know, and I had friends, even outside the fraternity, friends who I could go to when things got stressful and I just didn't know what to do. That was a huge piece of keeping my sanity as a chapter president, but also maintaining, you know, productivity. And then what have you learned from your predecessor? And if that's nothing, I'm sorry, but it's more common than not. If that is the case, let us know, let your field secretary know so we can get you some sort of a better transition. And then lastly, what will your legacy be as president of your chapter? If you don't know the answer to that question yet, that's okay. It's probably going to develop over time. But if you're going into this next year without some sort of goal of something to leave behind, or how you're going to leave the chapter better than the way you found it, it's just not going to be a productive year, and it won't be anything that you can really learn from as an individual. So I'll give a couple minutes while a couple more of those come in.
Also learned that you can't post a video in the chat, so we will add it somehow to, well, it'll be in the program that you can watch up to 30 minutes or 30 days after.
Okay, I see Nick says reworking the financial system, doubling the size of the chapter. Ambitious, but I like it. Dominic said learning to delegate effectively. That's a huge one as a chapter president. We'll get into it a little bit later, but delegation is great, but you also need to have accountability and know when to step in when things aren't getting done. Safety and well-being of the chapter at the top priority. Awesome. Will said leading by example. We'll get into that later too. That's a great one. All right. I think we can go to the next one, Helen. All right, so Chapter Presidents 101, we're going to start pretty basic and build off of that. These on the screen that you're seeing are the absolute basic functions of being a chapter president, that if these things don't get done, the chapter is in very big trouble, financially and otherwise. So the first thing, most important, and all this stuff a lot of this stuff you can find on the website, like I said in the previous block. The officer's calendar is going to be your go-to for almost everything. Any important due dates, any deadlines, things that need to be turned in or done. are going to be on that officer's calendar. That's just on the website under undergraduates. You see the screenshot there. You should be checking that on a monthly basis at the minimum. That's going to be when payments are due and when roster updates need to happen and all those types of things. So make sure you keep an eye on the officer's calendar often. And then the next thing is communication. So yes, the corresponding secretary is the PR guy in the chapter, but the chapter president is the communicator. So that includes a whole bunch of people. That's your field secretary, that's your Purple Legionnaire, your Greek advisor, that's the school, that's your community, that's anyone that interfaces with the chapter in any way. You are the primary communicator with them. They're going to have questions. They're going to need you to turn things in, forms, things like that. So be sure to keep up with your communication. And with that, if you haven't heard it already from the previous chapter president or someone, you will constantly be bombarded with emails. You will probably wake up to a dozen emails, and by the end of the day, you'll probably have 40 or 50 more. My biggest tip with that is if you don't have your email on your phone, an email app, whether you have Outlook, Gmail, whatever you use to communicate with the school and with IHQ and all of them, make sure you have an email app on your phone and you are checking it at least a couple of times every day. Check it in between classes, check it at lunch, check it when you first wake up. And as you're looking through those emails, sort out the junk that just is somebody spamming, trying to get you to get your composites through them or buy t-shirts from them, maybe forward those onto the t-shirt chair or something like that. But that gets to my point of delegating. If there's an email from IHQ about needing to make a payment, if it's appropriate, then just forward that right over to the treasurer. Don't make it your issue because that's something he can handle. If it's something regarding pig dinner or some other chapter event, send it to the pig dinner chair or the graduate relations chair or whoever it may be. Try to compartmentalize those emails so that you're not, putting it on yourself to answer all of those, and so that nothing falls through the cracks. Empower your chairman and your cabinet to take on the roles that they're responsible for. And also with that, it's a two-way street. So if you haven't heard from your Greek advisor or your Purple Legionnaire or someone like that recently, it's on you to reach out to them, really. You should be sending them regular updates, especially your Purple Legionnaire and your Greek advisor. If you haven't heard from your field secretary, first of all, tell me, but feel free to reach out to them whenever you have questions and things like that. And lastly, I touched on it a bunch in the last session, but roster updates, roster updates, roster updates. You need to keep that roster on our website updated. Otherwise, you're going to either incur costs that you shouldn't, or we're going to be sending emails to the wrong people and communication is going to fall off. So be sure that that gets kept up to date. All right, so administration. So internally, what does that mean? That's setting goals, that's having accountability systems and learning from the past so that you can be better in the future. You need to have strong accountability systems, and that includes both formal and informal. If there isn't one started already, I talked about in the last session, the conversations tab, the forums. If there's not already a forum about informal and formal accountability systems, I think we should start one and talk about what some of your chapters have done well to hold your brothers accountable, both through like judicial boards and those very formal systems, but also like you saw Jim Link talk about with courageous leadership, those informal accountability systems. I think that'd be a great way for us to share some ideas there. And then also, you need to evaluate where the chapter has been since you joined and why you decided to run for this position in your chapter, and decide where you're going to take it in the next year. If you are not going if you're trying to get somewhere without directions, without a GPS, you don't know where you're going. So be sure to do that self-evaluation as well. And then earlier I saw a couple guys put it in the chat, leading by example. That's really in a lot of facets. So first of all, scholarship. I'm sure you all have heard scholarship, fraternity, self, the motto, and you came to school hopefully to earn a degree. If you came to school just to join a fraternity, I kind of question some of your motives, but you're there for your degree, so scholarships should always come first. And that means that you should be having some of the best grades in the chapter. You should be the guy that is deciding to study on a Friday night instead of going out to some social event. If you are setting the example, that's going to show the younger guys, that's going to show the guys that are always, brushing off school, that it's important to you. And as the guy in charge, that's going to set the right example. So chapter operations wise, I would encourage you to attend any and every event that you can. And that's not just chapter events. You should attend as many chapter events as you can. Philanthropy, community service, everything that you can, you should be there. But also other events, whether that's another fraternity or sorority's philanthropy event, or maybe a multicultural group is hosting something. As chapter president, I went to a couple multicultural potlucks. There was a couple of multicultural groups that got together to host an event. And I was the only fraternity guy there. And what does that say about Fiji and the chapter? So there's some PR in there, but there's also just some community building there. And then as well, professionalism. So you should really refrain from engaging in gossip, both in the chapter, but also just in the Greek and campus community. Be the adult in the room or virtually, the Zoom room, even if everyone else isn't. If the president is the guy that is inciting gossip and inciting, discourse and things like that, that's going to cause a lot of toxicity in your chapter. So I would encourage you to remain above the fray and try to handle all situations as the quote unquote adult in the room. And then lastly, with administration, record keeping. So yes, the historian is in charge of archiving chapter history. That's his job. And yes, the RecSec is in charge of taking notes and minutes and all those things. But it falls on you to keep orderly and accurate records too. And that includes goals you set and milestones you reach. I know a lot of you probably in this chat are looking to apply for some fraternity awards later this spring, which if you want to learn some more about, my counterpart Brian will be doing a couple of sessions tomorrow afternoon on that. But if you're looking to apply for awards or whatever it may be, you've got to keep good and accurate records and know what the chapter is accomplishing. But also with that, any chapter events or anything you host or attend, especially for social events, we talked about it a little bit in the risk management portion. If anything goes wrong, you're going to be the guy that's taking phone calls from me or Todd Rogers or Helen. You're going to be the guy that's taking the call from the director of student conduct on your campus asking what the heck happened. So if you don't know, that's not going to be a good enough excuse for them. That's why it really it benefits you to know what's going on. And if you don't, then you need to empower your brothers, your cabinet, your chairman to inform you when things are going on. And that goes back to the vulnerability piece that we talked about this morning, where if they don't feel comfortable telling you what happened, even if it was something really wrong, then that's something that the chapter needs to address at a much larger level.
Yeah, a quick add on to professionalism. That the internet keeps receipts. So whether it's GroupMe, whether it's Twitter, whether it's any platform that you're using, it's really hard for it, once it's been said, to truly go away. And so keeping that in mind when you're working above the fray, as Joe put it, as the leader of your chapter. Okay, so a couple quick things. Joe will get into a little bit more of the PR, but I did want to touch a little bit more specifically on COVID, and then touch on Abolish Greek Life, which we saw pretty significantly in the fall across the US. So we'll start with COVID. Plain and simple, the pandemic and the consequences are still very real. We're experiencing significantly high case numbers in a lot of states. well over that 15% threshold, which many of the states have used to trigger different levels of restrictions. And so we, have to think about what we are really trying to enforce and align when it comes to the guidelines and the expectations. And I know many of you said that it fell on deaf ears, or you felt like you were running into a brick wall or talking to a brick wall when it came to COVID. And we know that because we felt it too when we were trying to share what our expectations were. But we've navigated it for now about a semester and a half. And so if we can figure out a way to better communicate this when it comes to the expectations around gatherings, events, recruitment, ritual, it'll just be better for us in the end. And if you are truly unsure how to do this, connect with your field secretary or one of us, and we can help with some of that communication. It doesn't have to fall on you all, as many of these policies and regulations aren't yours to manage. But we want to help you communicate that out so brothers understand that if they choose to do something different than what you are communicating, that there are consequences. Joe did mention that the Archons have changed the bylaws in the pandemic in order to have some backing when it comes to a violation. So know that that is still in place and will still be what happens should a COVID violation occur. We're always going to default to the strictest policy. So it's really important to know what your local, state, and university guidelines are. We don't have our own, but our expectation is that you're following what those entities say or state. And then the second piece is abolish Greek life. So many of you saw that across your campuses. Many of you read about it or saw it on Instagram. They generally stemmed from some type of Instagram account, usually around the topic of sexual assault or sexual misconduct, things in that kind of realm to start. And they picked up steam as the fall semester really took on. And so it was a concerted effort for us. We saw about 33 chapters of Phi Gamma Delta become impacted in some way, shape, or form. And it was definitely depended on the chapter. Some, it was an hour thing where it became a thing, and others, it went on for about 9 months. And so it varied in strength, but at the core of this, people had come together and really called out some of the problematic behaviors that exist in fraternity and sorority communities across North America. And so what we are really wanting to do is reposition ourselves and focus on not only the positive aspects, but how we can address the concerns that all of us agree need to go away from fraternity life. And so it is our hope and our goal as fraternity staff to really work on those topics, right? We have the power to sort of reclaim what we know to be true about being a great fraternity man, a productive member of our greater Greek chapters. And so it's a good way to kind of have it thrown in your face, like Justice said. And so we can work on addressing it how we need to address it locally. Global strategies, right, are important, but what really works are those local tactics. So what makes sense for your chapter, for your community, and how can we help aid in that? So we're not positioning ourselves to crumble to people who don't really know what we're about or are making false claims on the acts of one in many cases. And so I think we're just trying to kind of reclaim who we are and where we want to go in 2021 and how do we do that together. But again, a lot of people saw it in many different ways. And so if your chapter has been affected or it's happening on your campus, we haven't really seen it in a while, but let us know, let me know, and we're here to help work through it in any way that we can alongside of your graduate brothers or anyone else on headquarters staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to George for pointing out the photo on the screen. Hi, George, I miss you. So that photo is there very intentionally, brothers, and it's not a political commentary whatsoever. The point of including this photo and that press conference that was held a couple months ago is that optics matter and planning matters. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, anywhere in between, this photo does not look good. And it speaks to planning and having good optics and having a good image for your community. And that kind of goes into my point about traditional PR, is that relationships are key. Whether it's your graduate brothers, international headquarters, your university or college, parents of brothers, your community, it doesn't matter who it is. You should be putting your best foot forward to put the chapter in a positive light. And that kind of goes back to what Helen was talking about with COVID and Abolish Greek Life. You know, if Fiji is known on your campus as the chapter that is trying to, I guess, sneak around the COVID rules as much as possible, or, you know, God forbid, if your chapter is named in an Abolish Greek Life post or something like that, that is not just a bad look for you or that brother or whoever it is. That's a bad look on Phi Gamma Delta as a whole. And one of Bill Martin, our former executive director's favorite sayings was, the most precious thing that we have, that's really easy to lose and really hard to get back, is our reputation. It's our good name. And if you're not planning these things out, if you're not putting the best image forward about your chapter, you could potentially be tarnishing your good name. Xavier, how do you deal with overly political brothers, or should we do anything? Unfortunately, I know what you're talking about, Xavier. That's my chapter brother. It's a challenge. And I encourage you guys to talk about that in the chat or in a forum. Ultimately, we live in a country where we have social media, and especially in a very hot political climate, there are going to be brothers who express their political opinions on their Instagram page or on their Facebook or something like that. And I think what's important is to respect them voicing their opinions and using whatever platform they're using, but reminding them that whether you're wearing your badge or whether you're wearing your letters or whatever it is, and I'll talk about this later, but you have Fiji tattooed on your forehead from the moment that you accept your bid. You might think that you can go to a bar or something like that and just kind of be amongst the crowd, but everyone in that bar, if they're from your school, they know you're a Fiji. They might not know your name, they might not know anything about you, but they know you're a Fiji. And your actions and how you say things, what you say, not only impacts you, but it impacts the chapter and the fraternity as a whole. So Xavier, I would encourage you to respect that brother and his freedom to say what he wants and voice his opinion, but remind him that it reflects the fraternity.
Are we ready, Joe?
Yeah. All right, so what I was just talking about, especially as chapter president, you are Phi Gamma Delta. To the university, to outsiders, to anyone who isn't in Greek life or in your chapter, you are Phi Gamma Delta, you are Fiji, because you're probably the only Fiji that they know. And with that, you need to carry yourself in a way that you're shouldering the responsibility of Phi Gamma Delta at all times. That means walking around on campus. That means, I guess, these days on a Zoom call for class. It means on social media, like we just talked about. Everywhere you are, like I said, Fiji is tattooed on your forehead. So you need to carry yourself with that responsibility in mind. So you should always be introducing yourself, always be kind and helpful to strangers around campus, demonstrate to your peers and your community what it means to be a Fiji gentleman. If you're walking around campus and you're not that friendly guy, that guy that's approachable, that reflects on Phi Gamma Delta, because if the leader of the organization is a rude guy or a mean guy or a guy that, you know, is known for not so great things, that's how they're going to view your entire chapter. So again, going back to leading by example, that's really what you need to be doing 24/7, 365.
So like Rob mentioned in his opening and Jim Link talked about in testing points, the fraternity has really dug into some of our approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion items. And there was a task force formed and a work group working on some of these key items. And while we don't have a large update for you, knowing that the fraternity is working alongside of many of our great graduate brothers and experts in higher education, this is something that's important. And the reason we noted it here was, if you aren't already doing some of this work locally and at your chapter, it would be a really advantageous thing in this new year to start working towards. No one is going to be an expert right away on this. And if you are needing help being connected to folks on your campus or want some perspective from the fraternity, reach out to your field secretary, reach out to Joe or Brian, let us know how we can help. Awesome, Jack, that you've elected a diversity chair for recruitment and public relations. But it goes into more than that too, right? How are women being treated at your fraternity events? How are Mom's Day, Parents Weekend, Dad's Day? All of those things are really tied into some of these pieces. And when you're looking at equity, dues, right? And so it kind of gets into that, the next bullet. And so the year-round recruiting piece is huge. It's always been a priority of the fraternity to recruit 365 days out of the year. And it felt challenging during the pandemic. And so there's no slap on the wrist or anything like that. But if it's a challenge that you feel that you can take on, it would be really helpful to the chapter to start engaging in this type of work, meaning 365 recruiting. And we put there like that business mindset and that things must continue. Phi Gamma Delta will prevail. We know we will make it for hundreds of years to come. But this comes because support and services must continue to work and engage in that support. Field secretaries, the chapter services team, we all had more touch points with chapters this past year than we've ever had in years past. And while that's not what it's all about, we've learned a lot by having more of our time with the chapter brothers. And so we took an approach where there was a reduction of cost for dues if you paid early and on time. And I would expect the fraternity to continue to have some type of incentives for getting a portion in and looking at that from that lens. And so locally, you know, how can you reallocate some of the money that your budget typically has for large social events into the brothers, into brotherhood, into small things for everyone to celebrate. But the services and the support that we provide, not only at IHQ, but you all as your cabinet to your brothers, is really critical. Now, we may not need the same exact money that we've always had, but it's good to start working up to that and continue to collect and have an operating budget, because one day this will look different, right? We will go back to events. We will have types of functions where the services that are needed will have to be paid for. And so that happens when we continue to operate as much as possible in that normal realm. Now, I don't mean to overcharge or expect more. I think we all need to be brotherly and supportive of financial crises that have happened because of this. But we have to keep in mind that operations still need to continue. And how can we give grace but still collect something to keep the operations moving forward? And so year-round recruiting really ties into that if we are continuing having new men join brotherhood. And with new men comes new opportunities and new financial support for the chapter to engage in different ways, which then ultimately allows the fraternity to engage in different ways. But many restrictions have been put into place for headquarters staff to continue to be good stewards of the fraternity's funds. Many of us are still working from home. Many of us, there's been a halt on all fraternity travel, and that in a large part saves the fraternity a lot of money to help reinvest it in ways with the chapters. And so we want to continue to make that a priority, and will continue to do so until the future times arrive where it's safer for us to be out on the road with you all.
Helen, we had a good question in the chat that I think it might be helpful if you could take a stab at. What would be a good way to deal with being attacked on social media? This last summer, we had a random student that had never been around us claim that we threw an off-campus party. We didn't really know how to react.
Yeah, I think that's tough for sure. Let's see, we had someone jump in. Explain to your chapter that any response goes, yep, from the cabinet member. I think it's always a good opportunity to make sure that the chapter president is the one that's speaking and the person out front. This would also probably be a good opportunity to engage your IFC or your fraternity and sorority advisor on your campus locally. But most importantly, your graduate brother, your PL, others, that housing corporations potentially, they could be able to, they are probably in a better position to help get the facts as far as that party, what you know, what are the kind of fact-finding things that you can do to gather more information about, what went on that day for your chapter, so you can sort of account where the brothers were and give that information, especially if you know for certain that it wasn't, your chapter, or it wasn't a chapter event. But working with those people as quickly as possible, that will really, I think, help aid in a better outcome for you.
Yeah, and just as another helpful resource, I dropped in the chat Phi Gamma's incident management tips, and you can find this just on the website under risk management, undergraduates risk management. For any general situation where there might be a PR issue, whether it's like Abolish Greek Life or something like that, definitely consult those incident management tips. Inform us. We have an appointed general officer who is our PR director, who his entire job is to manage good and bad PR. So we want to work through those things with you so that you're not putting out some statement or something like that that's just going to get you into more trouble. So depending on the level of the incident, be sure to consult those tips and let us know about it.
For sure. I had a thought, but it escaped me, so maybe it'll come back. But usually do what Joe says and you'll be fine. All right, we're going to do a quick activity. Some of you have probably seen this at some point. It's called 4 Phases of a Chapter. It was sort of it's by no means this like written word that everyone has to follow, but a group of us, probably ranging in 50 to 100 years of experience working with fraternities, men, sort of anecdotally drove this down to 4 phases of all chapters when we see things that happen. So we're going to have you think about it in terms of your community, so where you go to school and your broader IFC community, as well as your individual chapter. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're kind of going through this. It'll make sense. There's 2 slides, but we will get started. So the early years, your new chapter, newly chartered, really excited. You joined because you wanted to see a different fraternity experience. Any other fraternity that was on campus didn't have what you were looking for. And so when the opportunity came to start a new chapter, you were like, heck yes, I am ready. This is for me. I don't want what they had. I want to create my own experience. Next, you kind of have those glory years. You are thriving. You enjoy fraternity functions. You like Academy. Most of the brotherhood attends. You're excited to apply for awards. And you're just overall good chapter morale and have a good sense, and you're starting to get recognized for that, right? You've won awards for the fraternity. Maybe you're getting recognized at your annual fraternity and sorority life awards, but things are going well and people are excited for the success that your chapter has seen. The next kind of phase is what we like to call slippery slope. Your chapter is still doing well, but it's a little divided, right? You start to kind of feel the pressure from some of the brothers where they want to take everything one step further or potentially do something that generally isn't in the lines that your fraternity or your experience has played into. There's more focus on the social aspect. You start to pull away from some of those core things that you really maybe saw as a freshman, or maybe more community norms that your chapter hasn't experienced in the past. So it's sort of like work hard, play hard mentality is sort of what is encompassed everywhere. You're not in trouble, but you're really looking at it and you're starting to predict, man, if we got caught, something bad could happen, but you're not quite there yet, right? You're hearing about these things secondhand. You know of a couple guys, you could anticipate something on the horizon. And that last piece is what we like to call Lord of the Flies. So if anyone read that book, just sort of chaos all the time. Number one priority is party, sort of that solidarity around that guy, right? Everyone sort of huddled around those decisions, and that has become the moral compass of the chapter. Nothing to do with winning awards, showing up to fraternity events, completing things that the international organization has asked you to do, communication with your graduate brother. Those sort of things have really flown off the handlebars, and your sole goal is to party. Now, when you look back at Slippery Slope, that really came from this story from an advisor that we were working with, and a group of brothers were tired of the rules, so they moved out and got an annex house. Well, at this chapter, outside of the house, they put a sign up, and that sign, they named their house Slippery Slope. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and these things have come up because we have seen them occur. And so thinking about the experience as a whole, we have seen chapters ebb and flow through these 4 phases. So next, we'll try to think about this in the terms of it, right? So you see perspectives down one column, and then you have the early glory, Slippery Slope, and Lord of the Flies. So what is that perspective, and what are you seeing? A couple things. I don't know if any of you have seen Wolf of Wall Street. It's one of my favorite movies, but Jordan Belfort will be our Belforts for there. He's charming, charismatic, has a group of guys following him through doing just about anything and everything you could imagine. And his sort of persona is taking reins of what the chapter acts like. And so when you think about the chapter from that perspective, like take a moment, where are you at? So your average member mindset, the type of student that is joining, the breakup among your chapters, the A team versus B team, the members, how are you selecting members to join Phi Gamma Delta? Where's that motivational level, the transparency, your leadership development programs or your field secretaries, like what is your relationship with them? And so as you go through it, right, the early years, the glory years, Slippery Slope, and Lord of the Flies, you start to see it change. So we'll give you 45 seconds or so looking at the slide and just start in your head to think about where you fall as a chapter, as a community, for both. So in the chat, thinking about it in terms of your community, so not your own chapter, but just the IFC community and all of the chapters that make up your community, where do you see a lot of them? Like if you were to guess, like how would you categorize them? the bulk of the chapters? Do they fall in early years, glory years, slippery slope, Lord of the Flies? All right, got a few coming in. So a lot of some early years, some glory, a lot of glory years happening. Feeling a lot of slippery slope. Now, if we would take an average of this, I'm not great at math, but I know a couple things about statistics, and most things fall in what we call a bell curve, if you average it out, right? The law of averages. And so if you take all of these up, you generally find most people will kind of fall in that middle, in between the glory years and the slippery slope. The bell curve's not perfect. It was hard to do that on PowerPoint, but you get the idea. The middle of it is kind of that sweet spot where we see most people fall. But the unwritten rules sort of on campus, or what you start to see other chapters do, start to push this bell curve in a direction that we don't normally want, and as leaders make it really hard to do anything different. So you start to see this bell curve shift. And when you see that shift, you start to really look down sort of the path of almost where you're at a place where you're trying to turn around like a cruise ship in a creek. It's really hard to change the behaviors once you're getting to this point, to get it back to that place that we're really wanting. So if you think about this in terms of the top piece is like 0 starts at glory years all the way to 10 at Lord of the Flies. So it'd be 1 through 10. Thinking about your chapter on your campus, what would you rate your chapters? So 1 through 10, how would you rate your Phi Gamma Delta chapter on campus? So I think this is probably roughly my 15th time doing something along this lines with this exercise. And that inevitably comes to anywhere between like a 6.5 to an 8.5 of what most chapters individually will categorize themselves at. And so what we're really asking you to do is kind of get back to that sweet spot. We won't always be early years. We can't ask everyone to get back to the glory years, but what are small changes that we can make to move the bell curve back to the left, where you're in between something in the sweet spot of the glory years and slippery slopes? Like, your students, you should have fun. No one's trying to take that away. You're going to have things that come up. You're going to have different types of personalities and egos that pop up when you're trying to manage this. But it becomes a lot easier to think, if we can shift from a 7.2 to a 6.9, how much safer does that make it for us? And so some of you that really, dug in, Preston, you gave yourself a 7.2, or others that, put you somewhere between that 7 and 8 range. What are 2 or 3 things that you can do from that risk perspective that starts to bring it down? And when you bring it down, eventually that chapter and that community starts to bring it down. And the last thing that I'll say is, like, there's a line in the sand for everyone, for every chapter and for every community. And so if you can start to determine what that line in the sand is for your chapter about what you will allow and what you won't allow, it becomes a lot easier to manage some of this. Now, it's not perfect, and I can say that pretty easily from an ideal perspective. But having some of those ideas around the behaviors that you will and won't condone, and when you know where the line of the sand is, and brothers know where that line in the sand is, it makes it a lot easier to manage. Like, I feel as a non-fraternity member, the #1 rule or unwritten rule of a fraternity man is to constantly test the bounds. How far can I get to something before I get caught? And so if you can nail those things down with your brothers and with your chapter and maybe eventually the community, it becomes easier to sort of put all of the workings into play and to make change for the better when everyone knows what the play is being called in the first place. Joe, anything you'd like to add on this activity?
I don't think so. All right. So time management, self-management, this is more introspective on you. I already talked about this a little bit earlier. So the scholarship, fraternity, self mentality, I'm sure you all saw that in your Purple Pilgrim. You've heard it in your chapter. It's a common motto in Fiji. It goes without saying, scholarship, it comes first. You came here for a degree, get your work done. Fraternity, any time that you can give after your schoolwork is done, I would hope that you are giving it to the fraternity. You are the chapter president. You took on this role to give direction and to lead. And I would expect you to use that. And then lastly, with yourself, you're a human and you need to take care of yourself. I'm sure I've read 100 articles in the last couple of years about how this generation of college students is under more stress than any generation of college students for many, many, many years. You need to eat 3 square meals a day. You need to get 8 hours of sleep minimum per night. You need to try to get to your student rec center or something and get some exercise. Take time away for yourself, for your mental health. We were talking about it earlier in the chat, but talk to your brothers, get things off your chest. I'm sure Helen would agree with me. I can speak from experience as a chapter president. If you don't take care of yourself and if you don't manage your time well, you're going to have a bad time. You need to plan things out. If you don't have either a digital or a physical like calendar or planner, you should invest in one really quickly. Know when deadlines are, delegate when you need to. Yes, Marcus, I can't believe you're running for a second term, or you got a second term, Marcus. President burnout is real. It's challenging. So know that going into it. It looked like earlier a bunch of you were talking about when school starts. It sounds like school hasn't started for most of you here. Take the time now before school comes back. Yeah, Jesse, you too. I know you're back for a second term. Take the time now to plan out your year so that you can avoid that burnout. And then shifting to setting goals. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, so I'll kind of brush over it here. You must have had goals for yourself when you applied to your university. You must have had goals when you accepted your bid, and you must have had goals when you ran for president. So take time to continue to set goals for yourself and evaluate that progress. There's no point in setting goals if you're not asking yourself internally, you know, did I accomplish this? Did I get at least close? Evaluate where you're at, set good goals for yourself, but also for the fraternity. Where has the fraternity been and where do you want to go? We've touched on that theme a lot today. Your term is not going to have any impact on the upward march of your chapter or this fraternity if you have not sat down with your cabinet, your advisors, your field secretary, and done some sort of SWOT analysis or something similar and set smart goals to achieve what you guys want to achieve. So if you haven't had that intentional time yet, I would encourage you to get with your cabinet, get with your advisors as soon as Academy is over, and get that goal setting going. So I wanted to include this little piece from a Forbes article that I read, and it's about selfless leadership. So leadership isn't about you; it's about others. So this idea of picking the right wall. So the article quotes, "It's incredibly easy to get caught up climbing the ladder of success, only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. The others first leader has chosen the wall built by contributing to the welfare of others. It is a wall made with an unshakable foundation that leads to peace, purpose, and success." So if you're choosing a wall with a bad foundation, by the time you get to the top of the ladder, you're going to fall down and get yourself hurt. You need to center yourself on how you can serve your brothers, your community, and beyond. If you're not putting others first and focusing on what's best for them and for the fraternity, if you do put others first and focus on what's best for them and the fraternity, you will find success at the top of that ladder. And with that, practice serving. So like I talked about earlier with delegation and accountability, the worst thing you can do as a chapter president is take a task and say, hey, recruitment chairman, go do this. I need you to get this done, and just hope that he gets it done. That was a fault of mine when I was a chapter president early on, is just delegating and expecting it to be done. It should be followed up with, hey, I need you to do this, but what can I do to help? Who can I put you in touch with? What resources can I get you? How can I help you be successful? That's a really, really key piece of delegation and being a chapter president. And lastly, it seems simple, but listen. There were times for me, maybe there were times for you too, Helen. There's going to be times when those seniors at the back of the room, they are going to disagree with 90% of what you have to say, and it's going to be really frustrating. And you're going to want to tell them off and tell them that, oh, you're graduating next semester. It doesn't even matter what you have to say. I can strongly recommend that is not the right approach. Listen to them, hear them out, try to find some common ground. They're on the outs in the chapter. They're graduating soon. When they joined 4 years ago, it was a totally different experience for them than what you're going through right now. We like to say that, every fraternity chapter changes completely every 4 years because you have totally new people every 4 years. So those seniors came into something different than what they're leaving. So it's important that you hear them out, you listen to them, listen to the guy that doesn't speak up in chapter meetings very often. Listen as much as you can. All right, so motivation. I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to kind of motor through this really quick. But so this theory of thirds. So if you think about your chapter, there's probably these thirds. So there's 1/3 and 1/3, 1/3. Think about it in this sense. A lot of leaders want to focus their attention on that bottom third, the stubborn donkey that just doesn't want to move. You want to focus your attention on those seniors that don't want to show up to the philanthropy event. I get it. That makes sense. You think they're not contributing. But think about your chapter brothers and try to categorize them in these ways. Who are your horses? Who are the guys that are going to run full speed ahead without you even asking? Who are your mules who are going to be very easily influenced? So, for example, that guy who he pays his dues, he gets his grades, all that good stuff, but he's got to be kind of pushed to water. You got to lead him to the water. But the donkeys, they're going to do what they want. They're stubborn. So I would encourage you to focus on that middle third. Those guys are either going to be influenced by the horses who are going to teach them how to run and go, or they're going to be influenced by the donkeys and they're just going to want to stay put. So focus your attention on that middle third. And then I'm not sure where this comes from, but it's something we went through at last year's Academy with the presidents, and everyone seemed to like it a lot. So these are the 10 things that motivate young men. So I'm sure all of you would agree with me that you're probably motivated by these things in one way or another every single day of your life, in all aspects of your life. So what I'm saying is use this to your advantage. Use these things to motivate your brothers. But hold on. And Helen, if you want to click the next button real quick. You can't motivate with sex and alcohol because at the very least, it is probably illegal, but not a good idea nonetheless. And Helen, if you could hit it again. You don't want to motivate with guilt or with penalty either, because that's going to, if I could go back to, you don't have to go back, Helen, but you all can see the PowerPoint afterwards, the previous slide talking about, forced compliance, grudging compliance, willing compliance, and commitment. You're not going to get willing compliance or commitment if you're trying to motivate brothers through guilt or through penalty. So that leaves these top 6: money, food, fun, competition, friends, and cool experiences. So I'd encourage you all to take a picture of this and work with your cabinet. You know, how are we going to motivate that middle third, those mules, with these things in mind? You know, how can we have a financial incentive for brothers to show up to an event? Or, you know, how can we create some competition around scholarships so that we can get our grades up? You know, how can we get guys to turn out to recruitment events through a cool experience? What's a cool experience we could provide to get them to show up? So just a little thing to think about.
And these things are really tied to that transactional and transformational leadership we're trying to get at. Not having everything be so transactional. So this for that, quid pro quo if you're going into law school. Personal relationships matter, and belief in the same mission or goal. The more that we can encourage and motivate people through the things that they actually care about and that their voice is heard as leaders, the better outcome that we'll have. So kind of flipping things on its head, usually we're like, if you don't do this, you will be fined. And while you might have to do that at some point, that's not going to really encourage hearts and minds to get behind a cause that you guys care about. So thinking about ways to move what you do from transactional to that transformational, and it raises the level of motivation and morality that you all want in your chapters. Quick blurb, which is a little off the course of what we were doing, but kind of drives into your community aspect. The IFC board isn't the IFC. All of the chapter presidents or your delegates make up the IFC. So caring and dedicating just a little bit of time to what's happening in the council and community will really benefit what is going on locally. Some key items that tend to come up at various points on college campuses that the NIC and Phi Gamma Delta care deeply about are those key position items from the critical issues. Take a picture of that. If anything comes up in your meetings around these topics, it's best to let Joe or Brian know so we can work with the NIC on these items, because they're critical issues for the existence of fraternities and the fraternal experience. You don't have to be the IFC president, but if you can dedicate just a little bit of time and have a little bit of understanding of what's going on locally with your council, the better outcome for your experience will be.
And we are just about out of time here. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to start a forum on that conversations page for you all, where we can answer some of these questions that I'm about to put up on the screen. But keep those chapter size keys, like we talked about at the start of this session, your size of your chapter, as we look at the scenarios on the next page. So we were going to do some breakouts or some conversations in the chat about this, but maybe we can start a forum about it. So if you want to take a picture of this on your phone, or you can access the PowerPoint in the Files tab right next to the chat. We want the medium and large chapters to choose either scenario 1 or 2, and the small and medium chapters to choose either scenario 3 or 4. Totally up to you which one you want to pick. Pick one that maybe you think is most applicable to your chapter or your campus. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about how you would address some of these situations. This kind of goes back to some of our PR stuff, but also has some risk management implications, and some of it has some just leadership and motivational things tied into it. So take a look at these. I'll post up a forum in there at some point in the next few minutes, hopefully. So be on the lookout for that. I'll post that soon, and I'm looking forward to seeing your responses.
And all of these, go ahead.
Sorry, Marcus just asked a question. Where will this be? So Marcus, if you go, if you see the purple ribbon at the top of the screen of the Academy platform, so that 2021 Fiji Academy.pathable.co, there's a purple ribbon that says Fiji Academy Home, Schedule, People. And if you see that Conversations tab, and there's Public Forums right underneath the Conversations tab, you'll just scroll through that, and that's where I'll have it posted.
let us know with questions. We will have access to it, and we are here to help. Here is my quick contact if you'd like. The guys that you probably care most about are on this screen, and you can feel free to email them with your questions following this, or we can schedule a meeting with you and have it individually with you or your cabinet. Let us know how we can help. That's why we're here.
One last thing, I did see another question regarding the forum. Not mandatory. I highly encourage it, but not mandatory. And it doesn't need to be done by any period of time. But I think they'll all be posted up there for probably about the same amount of time that all of the content will be posted, so about a month. So I would encourage you guys just to go in there, answer your own, but also, respond to others and see what other people are saying about those situations. And with that, thank you all. And if you have any questions, like Helen said, reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer anything.
Thank you. We did it.
Are we out of the webinar yet?
I don't know.